Hey everyone, thanks for waiting while we get the meeting set up here. We'll just give it a couple minutes while folks arrive. I think we have most everyone who's going to join though. In the meantime, we have some materials on the subcommittee webpage that you can go to. And we just posted just a few minutes ago the latest V4 version of the draft that incorporates some of the comments that we received in between our subcommittee meetings. And we also just recently this morning posted the agenda just so you can follow along. My apologies for the delay in getting both of those documents updated here.
While we're waiting, I just really want to reflect on the fact that Mr. Yeager appeared before the Board of Commissioners this morning, and he positioned himself purposely in the room so a beam of sunlight was coming down over his head to summon divine intervention, if you will, during his presentation. Very well done, Mark. I was very impressed.
Well, you noticed, Sam, that I moved right away because I
Yeah.
couldn't see anything. The beam of sunlight was too bright. So.
All right, so I haven't heard from Brian May or Shane Sanderson. Let's see, we have Ian McNabb on, Bill Broman, Ginger Richardson, Ken Eklund, Mark Eager, Paul Neatfeld. I don't see Chuck Gilbert yet, haven't heard from Chuck. But let's go ahead and get started. We have an action-packed agenda, and we'll just hope that the additional folks log in here. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the agenda. And generally, we're going to be following the same sort of outline that we followed last time. The agenda is essentially going to be Paul and Ginger taking the lead to review the document, directing us to kind of needed focus areas. And I know this version 4 basically landed on the webpage as soon as this meeting started. So I can try to kind of be a reference point for familiarizing folks with the updates as we come across them. But essentially, Paul and Ginger, if you want to take the lead on kind of guiding us to the needed focal areas or needed areas that we need to focus on today. And I just wanted to briefly check in with Sam, see if there's any additional kind of subcommittee facilitator oriented items that we should cover before we dive in.
Very, very briefly, the first rough draft of the overall BCTT report will go out sometime today at the very latest, first thing tomorrow morning. It is focused as a structure for which each of the subcommittees will be able to insert their full body of their report. But the ultimate theme that we'll eventually need to drive for is in the body of the report, not your full report. That'll be copy and pasted into the document, but into the body of the report. My current half-formed or malformed idea is, an introduction as to, who you are, your subcharges, any preliminary statement you want to make, and then key findings, probably numbered, and I'll tell you why in a second, and then key recommendations, and then a conclusion. So you've got a lot of good stuff. I'm trying to think through how best it's going to be digestible by the readers of this document who haven't been at each of the subcommittee meetings, what have you. And my sense is that while you'll be able to, put in the full body, what you like, but we need sort of a high level. Here are our key findings that we are making. And I'm going to suggest that they be somehow numbered or lettered or something, because when we do the final surveys and the final polling of this, I can envision a process that I would say something like, all right, now we're at the capacity section of the report. Here are their 15 key findings. All right, finding number 3. Are you voting a 1, a 2, or a 3? Finding number 4. Are you voting a 1 or 2? And same thing for the recommendations. So we'll drive towards that starting next week, but that's kind of the heads up. And you'll all get a copy of this rough draft report. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. So while we're going through this, let's try to think about kind of getting this oriented and formatted as in terms of key findings as well. We'll start to think about getting those kind of put together so we can include that in the draft report that Sam is putting together. Okay. Yeah, Mark.
Thanks, Daniel. I just wanted to clarify. So I finally got a chance over the last few days to go through the version 3, I guess, because that's what I had. And I have some comments and questions about that. I don't know if it's our intention today to go through page by page, or whether it's better for me just to send my comments to you after the meeting, and then, you know, as appropriate, if they come up today, I guess, if Ginger and Paul are making presentations, I can ask questions, but I don't want to sidetrack everything by going through my comments page by page. So just looking for some guidance from you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I mean, I want the group to kind of help figure out where the discussion, I don't think we have the time to go page by page, but I think sending me your notes so I can just get them incorporated in here either way would be good, especially if we don't touch on anything today or touch on one of your comments today, just so we can get those added. And then my thought would be, you know, as it comes up in discussion, make sure to voice that so we can get that added real time. But if anybody else has any ideas, feel free to shout them out. All right, so let's go ahead and get started then. I'm going to share my screen. Anything else before we jump into the document here? Yeah, Paul.
Hey, Daniel and Sam, can you guys give us a bird's eye view of what our time frame is here? I think that would be helpful. I'm a little lost as to exactly when we are expected to deliver what. So if you just clear that up, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Sam, do you want to take the lead on that? I think you might be a better resource here for giving us a timeline.
Yeah. Let me just pull that most recent document here.
Thank you.
This will be part of this draft report, and it is on the website. It's the December 20th final work plan and calendar view. And actually, Daniel, if you could pull that up, that would be great. It was from the last meeting, and that would be visual and people can see it. But while you are looking for that, see if he's actually, no, it looks like a calendar. I don't know, you probably can't see that, but it looks like that.
Yeah, I see that. I'm going to pull it up now.
And maybe you can drop the link in the chat so people can, if they better visual on their screen.
Yeah, we don't have chat on this, but I'll send it out.
So, and extent you can make it bigger, that would be great. All right, so move on down, and here we are. So the here we are on the 3rd. I will be, as I mentioned, finishing this, what we're calling D1 of the full work group report, and I'll send it out today or tomorrow morning. The subcommittees then are going to do their best shot at what they can do this week and next week to refine that, their particular body of the report, working towards these key findings and recommendations. I will take all the subcommittees' work in the next 8 days, mush that all together and create draft 2, which I'll send out to the work group on Thursday, the 13th, in anticipation of our January 19th meeting, at which point the work group will look at and make any suggested edits they have using a format similar to what we did last time, which is the spokespeople for each of the subcommittees will ask for specific feedback on the topics, areas, findings, recommendations that they would want input on, and we'll facilitate that particular conversation. We'll take the work that comes from that, and I'll compile with obviously the help of staff version 3 of that report, and then that gets sent out to the work group on January 24th. It also goes to SWAC, DSAC, and the Planning Commission commissioners to give their feedback on that. You guys will continue to meet and refine. I'll work with Subcommittee E, which is the notice and public involvement issues, start working on an executive summary, what have you. And it just follows from there. So that's the best overview I have now, Paul, recognizing that it's going to ebb and flow based on what can be accomplished realistically and when, but I try to graph it out.
So if I understand correctly, we basically have a week, Sam, to try to pull together the initial version that's going to flow into the larger report. Is that correct?
Well, that's sort of like the dream schedule. I do not think that's probably going to be realistic given the, because I scanned some of the work product that you guys are working on today. So that's why, we're going to have to be flexible, and you guys in particular can only do so much in that period of time. And so all I can say is I'm going to work with you, and we're going to be flexible, and we're going to do the best we can to follow this schedule, but recognizing it'll probably be observed in the breach.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the guidance. I'm just trying to get a picture of, how
Yeah.
much runway we've got here. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I had the same question. At the end of the meeting, we're going to have to schedule our final sessions to be reviewing this. And Sam, do you have an idea of when you're expecting kind of the subcommittee's last meeting to be for us to get a product to the work group?
Well, it's you're going to have to keep going down here because it's, you're going to have to meet through February because our last meeting should come up, keep going down. Right. So our last meeting is March 16th. I would say, and that's really we're dotting I's and crossing T's to get that going. So I would definitely suggest if you could scroll back up to the first part of March, I would say you'd have to schedule where it had last call there. So, subs meet for last call that week that ends on March 5th.
Okay, thanks. So let's start thinking about that too as we go into the end of our agenda today to talk about our following meetings. Great. Anything else before we go into the document here? All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Does everyone see that? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Thank you. So Paul, feel free to work with Ginger and take the lead on directing this conversation. If you're at a loss, feel free to pull me in. I'm happy to help. Essentially, we've gotten comments from Ken, Ginger, and Chuck that I was able to incorporate into the version, in addition to some comments that came up during the work group, but I might have missed some. So feel free to, draw attention to work group comments that came in too.
All right. So Ginger, my sense was we could kind of go through section by section here and just kind of assess where we're at. I think what I'd be looking for would be input from the group as to what needs to happen in each section, what things are still outstanding. If we have time, we can dive down into some typo corrections and things like that. But I was thinking of a little bit higher level of just section by section kind of going through and getting the sense from the group of what shape the document's currently in, what it lacks, et cetera, and trying to blast all the way through the end of the thing before we run out of time here in an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at this as we've been talking on the meeting, during this call, Paul, because like Daniel said, this just dropped. I think some sections are actually, it appears to be in fairly good shape, and I think we have some consensus in various portions. So I think what we probably want to do is just go, as you said, section by section, and highlight the comments that maybe the rest of the group haven't seen.
Okay.
Incorporate those for discussion.
Yep. All right. Okay. So let me dive right in, and Ginger or anybody, of course, just speak up as I'm plowing forward, because sometimes I get focused on what I'm doing. I'm not always paying attention to hands up and things like that. So first of all, we've got the background section. I think that's fairly uncontroversial. Daniel, if you scroll down a little bit, when we get to section III, that's a new section that was inserted by Chuck Gilbert. It just seems like some basic background and definitions that are germane to the topic of this report. So seems fair enough. Ginger and your team, I would ask that you guys look this over to make sure that these are technically correct. If you have any disagreement with them, we ought to get that sorted out pretty quick, because these are just pretty fundamental definitions that Chuck derived from some ORS statutes and things like that.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to task Ian and Bill with just taking on the definitions part, because they're the
Okay.
Lost. Did we lose Ginger there?
It sounded like it.
I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't hear it. You said you're going to task it with Ian and Bill, and then the rest of it sort of got garbled.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, they just have the technical expertise.
Okay. Yeah. So I have just one question here. It's in the common terms. The last sentence talks about Coffin Butte landfill as a regional disposal site and an engineered sanitary landfill. Generally, I think that's probably true, but I think that it's true that cell 1 and 1A are unlined cells and would not be qualified as engineered sanitary landfills. I know that's not, that's historic, but I think I want to try to make sure that this properly characterizes the entire landfill. So I'm happy to be corrected about that, but I think cell 1 and 1A are unlined and probably wouldn't qualify as engineered landfills.
Right. Any other comments right now while we're on this section, since it was newly added from the first draft? Okay. Next section just talks about membership composition. Yeah, Daniel, if you just roll down to that, is this, let's see, Benton County community members. Yeah, so that's been consolidated down to basically franchisee, community members, and county governments. Seems like a fair breakdown to me. Is everybody okay with this? I just think it's important that the reader understand, the positions associated with the members here is the only reason I wanted to put that in. Okay, next page. A little bit of document organization stuff. We've kind of been over that before. So let's move on to landfill size, the first charter here for the group. So here, my sense is I think we could still use some more data here in terms of the history. Daniel, I know you were looking at trying to find some snapshots of the footprint over time. Any update on that?
Yeah, so I ended up putting some images or maps below the current footprint. I'll just scroll down so you can see them.
Yep.
We put together a property list that's in Appendix C with a fair amount of detail. We've numbered these properties so you can refer to their tax lot numbers and everything, and some notes. And then we added a supplement map that indicates the year the properties were purchased to kind of incorporate into the landfill affiliated properties. So this is what we have so far. So feel free to send us over any comments or questions you have.
Okay. Yeah, good. That's exactly the type of image that I was thinking of. Is it comments from the group here as far as concerns or suggestions here? Okay.
I just need to look at it. I
Right.
think it's great. Thanks for adding it, Daniel. I think that'll be super helpful. And once I get an opportunity to review it, might have some questions or comments, but that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and just a heads up, Ginger, of course, I would be looking to Republic to see if this disagrees in any way with the perspective or the history that you guys might have on file.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for
I
that, Paul.
definitely want to review it. There's at least one I see right off the top that looks like that's maybe the incorrect date.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I just wanted to clarify, I didn't work with Republic on this. This is just from records that we had access to. And in the Appendix C at the end, we have like a detailed kind of breakdown of the property list. So Ian and Ginger and Bill, if you can go through that and just double check anything that you want to edit or update there, please do so.
Well, and I guess I would just say that if there's a difference of what the county has for their records and what Republic has in terms of what they think when things happen, as long as there's some evidence to resolve any difference of opinion, not just that it gets to be changed, it should have some basis for a change.
Yeah, and Mark, what I'm basing it off of is that 1983 zoning change that moved a lot of the parcels to that landfill site zoning. Some of those parcels are shown as purchased after 1983. So I don't believe that's I believe we probably had to own them before we changed the zoning on them.
Probably did.
So,
Yeah. Thanks, Ian.
Some of those ones in the center, I think, are probably have been owned longer than 1997 to 1998 or 1988 and 1987. I think some of those probably date back into the 70s or early 80s at the latest.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a pretty rough first approach, and reading the deed documents is pretty tricky. So there can definitely be errors here, especially in relation to maybe we have a later date than it was actually purchased because of how the property changed hands within the landfill sort of operations. So feel free to go through that and update the chart at the end, and we can try to get the map updated based on that.
Okay. Well, thank you for digging in and doing that, Daniel. I know that's a lot of work, but I think it's
super helpful.
to have that defined. All right. Anything else on the history section here in terms of things that people believe we should be including or working on? Volunteers to add anything else, etc. Okay, current footprint, I think we've got that. Summary of the current configuration, yeah. Removing this clause, yeah. Yeah, I know Ginger's had some feedback on this. Yeah, the not to exceed 2 acres. I think there was some dialogue about that. Basically, that this called out the maximum area that could be left uncovered each day, but Ginger's comment is we use daily cover now and don't leave anything uncovered. So that's probably the 1983 CUP condition that I'd put in here, you know, apparently is not an issue. And in fact, there's a whole other subcommittee that's supposed to be dealing with CUP or condition compliance. So
Yeah, and so I'm on that committee, and so this is the language that's in the 1983 CUP, I believe. And there haven't been any subsequent CUPs that have removed this requirement. And since it's actually less restrictive than what the actual, I don't know what the DEQ permit says, but it's less restrictive than what Republic or the current operator is doing with the landfill. I'm happy to take a look at this and see if it makes sense to remove it, but I think it is factual as it's stated.
all right, thanks, Mark. And then in terms of the real subject of this current footprint, it sounds like that may be really derived from the data that Daniel has just introduced. All I was thinking here is, in terms of the footprint, we might want to cover the history, and then we want to give a clear snapshot of, as we are writing this report, here is the footprint. And that's the only reason that I broke this out into a separate section. So Daniel, I tell you what I will do is I'm going to take a look at the documents that you put in, the tax lot drawings, and if it looks like that's really going to answer the question of what the current footprint is, which I suspect they will, then I vote that we just change this section to refer to those drawings and say, you know, as can be seen from figures X, Y, and Z, you know, the current footprint, you know, is documented. Does that sound okay? All right.
Yeah, I'm thinking, this is Bill, going back to the reference to the 1983 CUP, not in arguing that that was the last referenced condition from the county, that there may be more restrictive rules governing how we handle daily cover. I'm not opposed to leaving that statement in there, however, being explicitly clear in reference to what has been issued by the county and currently what has been issued by the state that we are mandated to follow. I think that would be helpful for the reader.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bill. I think the other thing that I can do on my end is we've had so many meetings on the CUP group has met, you know, a dozen times at least, and I don't remember exactly. In some places where we believe that a prior requirement had been superseded either by DEQ permit or something, I think we footnoted it. And so I will go back and look to see how we've handled this in the CUP, the past land use work group, and try to make it consistent. Because I think on the past land use subcommittee group, I think we recognize this is not operable in terms of what's really happening with the way the landfill is being operated. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm totally, I'm fine with it. We'll just make sure they line up.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right, let's see. Yeah, if you just scroll through those. Okay, here we go. permitted disposal capacity. And once again, I'm kind of doing a two-step here with things. I think if we provide some historical information as well as then give a current snapshot, and I think that's kind of a useful way to approach it. Certainly willing to hear alternate points of view if you think we ought to break it down differently.
I made some suggestions here. Basically, we went through the site development plans and some of the kind of annual report pieces, and my comment was basically revolving around putting a site development plan next to annual report snapshot is really unclear and sort of misleading, because site development plan is, area to be developed versus the annual reports are really reporting on total capacity, total site capacity, these 39 million numbers, for example. So what I did, I added a couple annual report data snapshots that had the varying total capacity. Sometimes it went 10 years without changing the total capacity, and put all those together, these last 3 lines, and put a suggested cross through the 1995 and 2003 data, mainly because it's sort of apples and oranges. In terms of you're not capturing the total site capacity when you're referencing that 35 million number. You're missing out on that's area to be developed. That was a snapshot from that site development plan. Obviously, I think Ian and Bill might be able to speak to that a little bit better, but I just hesitate to put those side by side kind of as a comparison, I guess, because it can be a little bit misleading.
Yeah, I would agree, Daniel.
All right. Let me explain what my perspective was here in doing it. And this is very much a landfill neighbor perspective. But it goes something like this, which is, if you go back 20, 25, 30 years, the landfill was small. It was expected to stay small and not grow to the extent that it has today. And I understand almost all of this history predates Republic Services ownership of VLI. So this is kind of before your time. But from a neighbor and a Benton County community member standpoint, I think there's a lot of perception out there in the heads of many people in the county that don't live out here and don't drive by Coffin Butte and see what it has become, that still picture it as this little landfill you back your pickup truck into and throw stuff off the back, and then you drive away and it's a little pile of garbage and that's kind of it. And so I think it's important to document, even though there may be a little bit of apples and oranges, like you mentioned, Daniel. Just give us a few relevant dates where there was a stake in the ground that said, the landfill is expected to have a total volume of X, and plot that X over time. I don't think the minor variations that we see in the reports, especially once Republic Services took over, the tone of the annual reports really changed. They got a lot more precise, they got more organized, they got a lot more self-consistent. And so I think everybody understands that volume estimate is kind of going to go bumping up and down, as Ian has explained in the past. I'm not sure that's really too useful to the reader. It's an interesting little nuance for those of us on this community, or the subcommittee, but I don't think the general reader of this is going to be that key on it. But to understand from a broader, stepping back historical perspective, how the size of this thing has grown, I think is important to document here.
Yeah, just to chime in briefly, I see Ian has a comment too. I just wanted to mention that 1995 number. I definitely hear you, and maybe we can ask Republic to provide some total numbers for maybe 1995 and 2000 if it's possible, based on the footprint at the time. But data like this 18 million number, which is a line that appears in a graph that was a reference that isn't explained anywhere in the annual report, and is really, it's not data so much as it's like kind of a rough, like we don't know what that 18 million number was even referencing in that graph, right? So I just want to steer clear of the soft numbers if we have better information available, I guess, is kind of where I'm coming from. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah,
Ian.
the other piece that I'd add to it, yes, the overall landfill itself has grown over time, but that's also something that was expected. If you look back at the 1983 history, and the total acres zoned was 194 at that time. That's really not changed since 1983. We've developed those acreages over time, but that total acreage really has not changed much over time.
So I guess maybe the ask here could be, Ian, if you could maybe, if we could add to these data points like an acreage at a certain year, and if you could provide some sort of, as close as you can number for total volume at that time, I think that would be really helpful. I mean, we already have 2004, 2013, 2021. If you could even add one data point, right? Maybe to Paul's point, maybe a 1995 data point here that has a total volume and maybe a total acreage, that could be helpful. I don't know, Paul, feel free to chime in if that would do the trick here. I don't want to look at data that's like not comparable, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I understand your concern. Well, give it some thought, Ian, and we can have a dialogue. I think as long as if you and I, for example, have a discussion, or you and Ginger and I have a discussion, as long as we copy everybody, I think that's kosher within the rules. So I don't mind having a little sidebar as long as we keep everybody else informed.
Yeah, and I will preface, I have looked through what we've got for records going back there, and that early 2000s is about the best I have of any good numbers that are good numbers. I don't know, there's not a lot of records going back prior to that.
I guess I'd like to understand, just really quick, the relevance of a 1995 data point.
The relevance, Bill, is a lot of people that are out here today were around back in 95. There are a number of Benton County residents on the north side here that have lived here for 30, 40, 50 years.
Paul, I understand that, and I was listening very carefully to your statement about, their prior understanding of the landfill and perception of the landfill, and I'm only coming in from a perspective of January 2012, because that's when I started with Coffin Butte. So that's where my own personal timeline starts, and I think this alludes to a larger, grander picture that gets pulled away from my ability and Ian's ability to tie it to data. And that, that has to do with overall growth, population growth, and other factors. And we've gone down this avenue before about factors. And so, there could be a number of reasons on how and why Coffin Butte has grown. And, we did talk about a significant factor in 2017, that being the impacts from Riverbend. However, we've seen things happen in society that maybe, back in 2012, we didn't expect. Back in 1995, we didn't foresee these things. And so, short of going down that avenue as part of our charge, Ian and I are number guys, right? And I know Ken as he has his hand up. I know he has talked about different viewpoints and impacts to the landfill. And so I understand your comment, and we can provide the data we can provide, and we're going to be more than happy to do so. I think, though, going back in time prior to our ownership, it's going to be probably the same data that the county would have. And so as a group, if we make a decision to put a stake in the ground for 1995, then we just need to agree upon that number.
Thanks, Bill. And for the record, I think it's definitely relevant. I mean, we're talking about the capacity of the landfill. I think this is certainly sort of representative of the history of capacity of the landfill. So I think, yeah, the more we can add in here, the better for everyone's perspective. Take it away, Ken.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the, we're talking about the historical, having a history started 2004, I think is a bit misleading right there. I mean, the history definitely goes back farther than that. So the problem seems to be from what I understand, you've established essentially with the more recent annual reports, you've established kind of a standard for the quality of number, and then you're critiquing past information because it doesn't actually meet that standard. I think then that we should look for something that is relevant and indicative, such as when the when at various points in time the landfill was scheduled to close, the closure date for them. So, because that's something I think that goes back, I know like in the 1980s, the landfill was scheduled to close in the 2000s or in the year 2000. And so I think that is another indicator, and that's one that may actually be relevant, something which is known, because from the point of view of a landowner, of course, if they move into the neighborhood near to a landfill, they ask the county, well, how long is this landfill going to be here? And for people who moved here like in the 1980s, the information that they got was that the landfill would be operating for another 10 years or so. And here they are. So that is indeed the sort of, memory that from the neighborhood point of view really needs to be included in this document. Otherwise, it's kind of, it seems to me to really be lacking.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, so let's all think about the other types of benchmarks. Ken suggested closure date as a benchmark that we can use, and I agree with Ken that it's just really the data sort of quality is we're running into some issues here. So let's try to think about that. And Paul, I saw your hand, and feel free to take it away.
Yeah, so absolutely. I was going to propose when we get to it in section 3 that we divvy the landfill life projections up in the same breakdown that we're doing for the other sections, which was, hey, give us a snapshot of what the historical projections were. And that ties into exactly what Ken was suggesting there. And then we'll go into the current projection. So historical data, current thinking, that same kind of cadence in that section. So I do expect we'll cover that.
All right, so, we have Mark's hand too, Paul.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So just to the extent that it might be helpful, I can try to look at some of the land use applications that were submitted in prior land use actions, because there are reports that are part of those applications that talk about these things that Ken was talking about, the proposed closure date and things like that. So if it's helpful, there may be some cross-referencing or other documents we can use that were submitted during prior land use proceedings.
Thanks, Mark. Anything else before we move on? I'm mainly talking to Ken. I saw your hand. I wasn't sure if we already addressed your point.
Sorry, I'm fine. Forgot to lower my hand.
All right, take it away, Paul or Ginger.
Right. Well, good. That was a long time in discussion, but this leverages on a key point that I think we're going to find in other sections, which is Republic's perspective and their due diligence, of which they're obviously very proud, and hats off to them for being careful and wanting to be very strongly fact-based. My perspective as a neighbor is this report spans more than just your tenure here at Coffin Butte. And we will be as precise as we can be in every section, and we'll probably be a lot more precise in sections that are under your domain in terms of the chronology of the thing. But still, some of these historical data points I think are important to include. So we'll just have to sort those out as we go through them. Bill and Ian and Ginger, I understand you guys' reluctance to have items in this report that you cannot vouch for because they're outside of your domain of responsibility, but I still think it would be helpful to the reader to include some of those. So we're off now into capacity utilization. In other words, this is just a little historical shot of how much capacity is there and how much have we used and how much is available in this case of this chart. Does anybody have concerns with this? Again, I'm going to assume that Republic takes a look at this and flags it if they have any concerns.
Just for context, the update I made was I deleted the old chart and updated this chart with just dates going further back. We had the old one going to 2014, and I just took data from annual reports going back to 2001. And the gap between the blue line and the orange line is essentially that total permitted airspace wasn't reported till 2004 in annual reports. So we have a bit of a data gap there, but we have the airspace remaining, which is reported back to 2001.
Any comments or concerns on this? Okay, thanks for doing that, Daniel. I think that's a big help. And if people read this carefully, they'll get a good sense for how much we've burned and where we're at currently, what the trajectory is. I think more of that background for the reader is, could be helpful. I hope it is. And then we talk about, this was the near term. This was originally my terminology, my bad terminology, the quarry problem. So this whole section, I'm assuming we're going to talk about the time frame mismatch here, the conflict in terms of cell 5 to cell 6 transition. And we haven't bothered to update this because our understanding is Republic is in negotiations with KNIFE, and we'll see where that leads. And at some point, you guys can write something up. Does that sound fair, Bill, Ginger, Ian?
I think that was my intention, Paul. And I'll be honest, with the holidays, I need to kind of touch base with Bill, Ian, and the rest of our team to kind of see where things are at. So I can't give an estimate at this point on when I'd update the section, but I do intend to do it.
Yeah, we'll get to that, Paul. I can update the fact that during the window of time, we have been evaluating a number of different what we thought or had thought were potential alternatives.
Yeah.
And have eliminated a number of those alternatives just based on conflicts that we discovered associated with them. So, we continue to work with Knife River. We've been pursuing this aggressively, knowing our timeline, and expects to see something from them very soon. So that's kind of what I have.
All right, thanks. Well, that's helpful to know that's still moving forward. So, thank you.
And Paul, just for additional context, one of the pieces of recommended edits that came in from Ken Eklund discuss the sort of capacity challenges associated with the quarry, and I think some of that language might be able to sort of be used here as well, just kind of discussing the challenge from a high level. So we'll get to that later, but I just wanted to kind of note that there's some helpful language that exists in this document that might be helpful in this section.
Right. Any other questions on this? Okay, next section is the intake. This was basically a reworking of my plot that kicked this whole this all off here that I showed back in September 15th. So, this is data that Bill and I extracted from the annual reports. I think it's fairly cut and dry. The older, as I mentioned before, the older annual reports get a little weird. They're kind of incomplete. They're often self-contradictory. Wherever I've used a number from basically a pre-Republic Services era annual report, wherever possible, I've taken it from their tabular data. Most of the reports, even the older ones, have a table in there in terms of the source contributions at the input tonnages, and they'll have a total there. That often differs from the total they quote at the beginning of their report. So I've always used the tabular sum, but the differences are small. I think what we want to show here is, what the growth rate has been like over the past 30 years, basically, for this landfill. And I think this chart does it. Comments or concerns?
I just had one, Paul. I went through the data and it didn't match what we have on record for annual reports for several years. I would say maybe half of the years between 1993 and maybe 2006 or so. So I put together a chart below that essentially has, just so you have the data for what we have on record, and it might be the difference between what's reported at the top of the report versus the table. I'll double check, but that's one comment. And then the other piece is this blue line. I think we should probably either remove it or have a very detailed explanation for it, because I reviewed the 2000 franchise. There's not like a franchise limit to tonnage. There's a tonnage trigger for a updated baseline report. So calling it franchise limit and comparing it to the franchise limit of 2020 is just, I don't think it's accurate. So those are my two comments.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Daniel, of course, originally I put this line in before I presented it to the group because at the time we didn't have a good explanation for what happened in 2017, 18, and 19. And it's a pretty dramatic outlier. Given the 2016 franchise agreement, where it appears both parties acknowledged that there were going to be increased flows for 1 to 2 years into the landfill, I'm kind of mixed personally about whether that's worth beating that horse or not. Comments or suggestions from anybody else? Should we just strike the 2000 FA limit from this?
So Paul, you referenced the 2016 franchise agreement. I think you meant the MOU.
Yeah, MOU, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, yeah, and I haven't looked at the 2000 franchise agreement, so I would like an opportunity to take a look at that and see, and maybe you could help explain to me offline how you created that line.
Sure.
And then provide some feedback once I have a little bit more info.
Okay, will do. Daniel is correct that limit was not a hard limit in the sense that it didn't, trigger an exception or a violation of the contract. It basically said if that limit is violated, the county then can, at their choosing, go back and take some measures. For example, reevaluate the 2001 baseline study, et cetera. So calling it a limit, it's not the same kind of limit that the 2020 franchise agreement limit had. So at the minimum, I agree, Daniel, if we're going to leave this in, we need to put some verbiage to explain that nuance.
Or maybe we can call it something. I'll look at the language, but maybe we can call it something different than a limit.
Okay.
Understood, some sort of
or threshold or whatever.
Expectations for, something like that.
There's also a few complications of, the rate at which it increases. It's based on either population or 2%, right? And I think, we shouldn't be drawing a line unless we're pretty clear on what's accurate. So basically going through and making sure it's either 2% or the population increase for any given year. I just think that it's worth, double checking here if it's going to be included, and certainly making sure that it's not called a FA limit in relation to the red line that you have here.
All right. Yeah. the other way that it might be handled might be through some narrative, a sentence or two. Take it off the chart and then put some words in that say the franchise agreement had this understanding, blah, blah, blah. But like I said, I haven't looked at that 2000 franchise agreement.
All right. Well, thanks for that feedback, everybody. I appreciate it. Anything else on this? All right. Yeah, there's Daniel's data, and then I've got a little bit in terms of comments and discussion on this, because I think it's worth some comments from this group to the reader. And so I don't think we want to go through these line by line here. We've only got 20 minutes left to get through this whole doc. But what I would ask is everybody, please look these over. Obviously, if you think anything's incorrect or you disagree with it or have concerns, we should just hash that out by email or something. So Daniel, let's go on down to the next one. So Marge Pop in particular, and I think she's got a valid point, has pointed out that not only listing the overall flow, thank you, Daniel, I see you've already got this, but showing the contributions of the various source counties would be helpful. So thanks a lot, Daniel. I think that's a useful, let's see, Marion County's really grown. Yeah, Benton, despite its relatively lackluster recycling rate and some noticeable population growth, as Republic has pointed out, still is not a huge factor in the overall intake here. And you know, I understand this might be a chart that Republic might think is a little biased toward them, but I think understanding, particularly for the residents of Benton County and for the representatives of other counties, understanding what the makeup of the inflow is an important thing to document. Comments or discussion?
Just one quick comment. So I added this graph. This is a graph we've used before, or chart rather, but the one question I had for the group is, you know, we see this big increase from Metro, but we also see a fairly sizable increase from our other category. And obviously this is a stacked bar chart. We have, you know, a couple dozen, I think, counties that we could potentially put in that other county, in the other category. But the increases, reviewing the data, don't really have one, you know, other county that really makes up for a big jump. So I lumped them all together, but then when you do that, the other category, you know, shows that big increase. So I just wanted to point that out, that from my review, I couldn't really associate that with any specific counties that have any like measurable impact on the overall change. But I just wanted to point that out and see if anybody has any thoughts or questions on how to better show this data to make it more helpful.
No, I think as long as there's an asterisk or an explanation that shows what goes in, like, you know, that basically says essentially what you just said, like this includes, you know, a variety of, you know, whatever, it can be somewhat simplified, but I just don't want people to think there's like one other county or one other source that's coming from that.
That makes sense. Thank you. We have Chuck Sand as well.
Just a quick comment. Looking at Metro and Washington County, I know one of the contingencies really relevant there is population growth. So instead of pointing it, you know, or making an inference that Metro is sending down or another county is sending down, is if they have a larger population growth, that's relevant to more refuse being recycled, being compared to other counties of lower populations. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, so just including potential causes that might not be associated with River Bend necessarily. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, because, you know, the apartments have really grown in Washington County and Beaverton and those areas that still compared to population growth in Benton, Lynn, and Polk County. I'm just looking at the dark blue lines that are larger in 17, 18, and 19 as one of the possibilities of having more solid waste up there is with the population growth, which still needs to dispose of it in Coffin Butte. Just a correlation.
Okay, and then we have Ken and Mark.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding you correctly, Daniel, we're looking like in 2017, the other category takes a big jump between 2016 and 2017. And that's because essentially the other category grew. So other before that included some other counties, but then once the kind of the so it's a watershed growth. So now there are other counties still which are, or other sources, I guess, which is responsible for kind of the disproportionate growth in that bar.
No.
Is that what you were saying? That's what I understood.
No, sorry, I must have misspoken there. So it's not the number of counties that grew, it's like slight growth in a lot of counties. So for instance, you know, Josephine County might be listed from 2016 to 2017 that they grew, right? But maybe they only bring 200 tons to Coffin Butte a year. And maybe it grew from 200 to 250 tons a year. That's a huge growth in relation to their own waste, but not in relation to Coffin Butte's total waste. But when you add all the counties together, we see that growth in this other category jump. So I didn't see any measurable change in the number of counties or the like new counties coming on between 2016 and 2017. But the individual incremental growth in each of those counties seemed to increase, making this dark blue line grow considerably from 129,000 to 211,000. Does that make sense? Is like the increment is the individual growth within each county, but they're not listed out like Washington or Lincoln because the total waste that they bring in is so small that it wouldn't even make a dent on this chart. It'd be hard to read, I guess.
Sure. So the growth that we're seeing between 2016 and 2017 is, take a county like Josephine County. They used to send garbage to both Riverbend and to Coffin Butte. And then when Riverbend closed, they're now sending more of it or all of it to Coffin Butte. Because I mean, we do have to explain somewhere the fact that the dark blue section is, increased by 60 or 80% or whatever. And what we've said before is that's kind of what's going on. I think that may be helpful if with this chart there is a little asterisk on other, and then it just explains exactly what other is. Maybe you've got that somewhere. I can't see the whole thing, but I think that would be useful. And if there is an addition of, if there is indeed a watershed growth, so now more counties are being included or whatever that weren't before, to depict that somehow or indicate that somehow, I think would be helpful.
Thank you. And then I think we had Mark as well.
Yeah, sorry, Daniel, I had to step away for a second. So and I'm sorry, because I sort of missed part of what Chuck was saying. The attribution of increased volume from Metro and Washington County to population, that seems like that's going to get a little dicey, because I think there's a lot of variables. In 2017, 18, and 19, those numbers jumped, and I think that's probably more directly related to closure of Riverbend. But then in 2020 and 21, those numbers shrink quite a bit. So making some assignment of that increase to population growth, I don't think there's a direct or indirect correlation there. All the counties are growing. So I don't know. I guess I'll wait and see and I don't know how that comment was resolved because I had to step away, but I'll wait and see. I am a little concerned about trying to tie population growth to these numbers here.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, we didn't resolve that comment. I think I think we can probably include a little bit of commentary on the cause generally, and so far we really have Riverbend closure to attribute for the increases. In Washington County, I think is more obvious. I think the other counties is a possibility, something we want to double check with the rest of the group, but it's certainly likely. I agree. I think population growth is tough. I think we can talk about population growth kind of being consistent across this graph, which I believe to be correct. But if there's any other ideas on sort of attributing potential cause, I just know it gets really complicated when we're talking about a lot of different parts of the state when we're talking about waste generation source. All right, seeing no other hands, feel free to take it away, Paul.
All right, so I do have one final comment on this, and that on this chart, and that is, I suspect, at least certainly in the time period you've covered, Daniel, Republic Services themselves really know all the answers here. I think they probably have a pretty good sense of how much these increases came from population growth and how much came strictly due to the closure of Riverbend and the diversion of its input flow to our landfill. So if Ginger, if you guys care to provide any insight, this would be an opportunity for you to comment on that, because I think you guys are really the experts and have the most real information here about what all happened to change these values. All right, next section. Thanks for doing that, Daniel. I do think that'll be helpful. I understand some of the concerns here about it, but I think it'll be helpful to the reader. And then this was my suggestion, and this is another area where I'm proposing that the scope of the report go outside or beyond Republic Services tenure here as owners of VLI. This again is trying to provide a broader perspective to the reader and to community members and to other counties, frankly, about what the overall picture of Coffin Butte input flows would be or has been. And I know some of the old data is going to be sketchy, it's incomplete. I think we could still put a few data points in there and qualify them with the uncertainty that they have, but I think it would still be useful to have this plot. If nobody has an objection to putting something like this in, I will try to take the lead in terms of scrounging up data on this, maybe with the help of Daniel and some others.
Daniel, I know that we had commented on this previously, and at least for me, the comments aren't showing on the screen, but I just kind of want to reiterate Republic's position on this.
Yeah, Ginger, your comment, I believe, was Republic Services certainly understands the intent of this intake plot, but warns that historical records are both limited and potentially inaccurate. Is that correct?
Sure.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. My proposal is, let's see what data we can dig up. We'll try to keep it simple. We'll try to keep it fairly sparse. It's not going to be 100 data points. It probably won't even be a dozen, but it may be half a dozen. And we can talk about the provenance of each one of those data points, either through email dialogue or in the next meeting. Does that sound okay?
Yep, I mean, we'll be happy to take a look at anything if we don't have records to verify or back up.
Yeah.
What you find, like we'll certainly know that. But yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And we have Mark's hand.
Oh, hey, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel and Paul. If you could just back up a little bit, Daniel, I had a comment or a question. So if you just go up, we'll keep going up, please. To number 5 here. Hold it. Okay, so you corrected this already. Great, thank you. That's all I was asking about that number 5 about because there was a typo in there before.
There was.
So, all right, great. Sorry, thanks.
Okay, next we're off on the landfill structure, and I propose we basically just skip over this whole section. Ian's provided a lot of good data. The one comment that I remember seeing from Mark was that some of this is hard to read, and so we may break it out into tabular format. That might help. In terms
Yeah, I really think that a table will support these two drawings immensely, because the drawings are going to be hard for people to sort through.
Right.
Also, once we get this into a PDF, we can just import the PDF version of this drawing that at least digitally you can zoom really well. We wouldn't leave it in Word format as my suggestion.
Yeah.
So that's another solution here.
Great. I think both would be helpful, because sometimes people take information in different ways. And I like drawings, but some people like tables.
Yeah. Yeah, so I see that goes under cell detail, and I wrote your note down here, Mark. So yeah, I think we could just build a table directly from Ian's chart here, and that'd be easy for some people to read and assimilate, and it's easy to cross-check with Ian's master chart. So I will draw that up and get it in before the next meeting. Let me just make sure I write myself a note here. Okay. All right. Anything else on this section? I think we're in good shape here. Thanks to all the detailed data from Republic. Thank you, Ian. All right, let's see. So specific locations. This was kind of always the mystery charter to me. But I guess I'm thinking we could just kind of give the map of the current snapshot of where the landfill is at. If anybody else has thoughts about what should all go in here, I'm certainly open to suggestions. Yeah, right now we've got two plots in here. One is the old, yeah, that was like 2002. So I don't know. Well, I'm certainly open to comments and feedback on this suggestion, or this whole section.
So we added a little bit of detail in that appendix where I give like property information for each like landfill associated property. We also included the previous zoning for that property. So, you know, it's currently zoned this, and it was previously zoned this, and it has a year. I'm wondering if that's going to accomplish some of the intent of these maps. I wasn't really sure what the old zoning maps here were hoping to be used for, but we certainly captured a lot of that in the table in that appendix, if that's helpful.
Okay, I'll take a look at that, Daniel.
Yeah, and this drawing in particular is from the 1983 land use action, and it was very specific in terms of where landfill material could be placed, and so I think that that's what's trying to be represented here.
Yeah, in trying to put forth a sort of a skeleton suggestion for this document, I really struggled with this section, and I finally concluded that perhaps taking a shot of starting with the rezoning and showing what was defined then, and how it was thought of, and where we're at now would be a useful reference. So there, Mark, there's this chart from '83, and then there's the, I think the second chart was from the
2002 MOU.
2002 MOU. And this, I realized to the Republic Services people, this is like, well, so what? I will tell you honestly, for a lot of the neighbors, when you see this chart and realize that it's 20 years old, and you see that this area in yellow is defined as a non-disposal area, that was considered to be, pretty strong evidence that the thinking in those days was, this is different. And I understand you guys are going through the CUP application process and all that. There's, you know, and because of this, and it might seem egregious to point it out, but I think it's a historically useful reference. And again, obviously I'm promoting the neighbor's perspective here, but you know, we always saw that land as, you know, that's operational stuff, that's support infrastructure. It's never a pile of refuse. And so that's part of the fundamental pushback against LU 21047. And I think we'd be remiss in not including this reference in the document. Comments? Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I guess I was just going to say that, and while this particular picture comes from the 2002 MOU, the definition of how the property was to be used dates back to the 1983 land use action. And as Ginger has properly pointed out, it was clear that the land south of Coffin Butte Road was not to receive any landfill waste. It was for ancillary activities. However, there was a provision in there that unless it was approved but through some future land use action. So,
Right.
so that, but this dates back to 1983, not 2002.
Correct. Yeah, the data shown in this chart, this is a 2002 chart that is attempting to represent the 1983 definitions, is what I believe. And so your point is valid, and maybe Ginger might suggest that we include the same caveat here as a note below this figure or something, you know, qualifying the definition of the non-disposal area.
Yeah, I think it's already in there somewhere. I remember reading it in the last few days when I was reading through there. I think it's already talked about in the text somewhere.
Yes, it is. My only question for Ginger is, you know, if we keep this chart in here, should we include that qualifier with the chart?
I would prefer that it be located in the places where it is germane and relevant. And so if it's in there twice, I'd be comfortable with that. I think, you know, having it below the graphic is probably a good idea, Paul, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay. All right. Yeah, if you just remind me of that, Ginger, we can work something in there. I mean, it's perfectly fair to point that out, that this was not decreed absolute forever and ever, amen. It was, there was a qualification in there, and we should list the qualification. Be fair enough. Okay. All right. And then let's see, we are almost out of time, I think, but we can talk about the landfill life projections. Here's, like I mentioned earlier, here's my proposal is now that we're in 2023, the projection to the end of 2022 is kind of in the rearview mirror. So we don't really need to spend a lot of time on that. I think all this section here could basically just be moved to the nominal, the next subsection, section B there, the nominal life looking forward, because that's really what all this is now at this point. Yeah, that's where this stuff really goes, is here under B. And I would propose that for A, we kind of convert that over to a historical record of what the end of life for Coffin Butte was expected to be throughout the ages, if you will. I know that back in the 90s, they were expecting the landfill to close around the end of 2000. And so it's, again, I think just a few data points here to provide the reader with some context of, well, you know, we're about to talk about what our projection is now. What were projections in the past? Does that sound okay with everybody? Right. I will work with Daniel probably or whoever I can find to dig a few. Again, this will be a small number of data points. I'm thinking, you know, a handful, just to kind of provide a little overview context here. And then, that's really it. So I guess I'd go back. Ian, Ginger, Bill, do you guys have any updates to the scenarios that you published? Or are we good at this point?
You talking about the one up above?
Yeah,
No
the one
changes.
you provided, you know, a month or
Yeah, no changes to that at this point.
okay. All right. So, yeah, and then we come to the events and potential lifetime impact. Ken, I did have one suggestion to you, and I know this is going to be a little bit concerning probably, but to me, at a high level, your entire section 4, which basically talks about human factor impacts to wildlife, to the landfill life, are really a subset of this section, which is, you know, all the things that could impact the landfill life. Is, you know, are you willing to like summarize your section 4 and make it part of this, you know, events and factors with potential landfill life impact, or do you want to try to keep it separate?
I'm happy to do that. Because in my latest edit, I mean, I've kind of taken the core ideas and expressed them mostly visually in additions that I have, you know, right there to section 3. So the only concern I have is that, you know, it requires some explanation for these charts to understand what assumptions go into them, you know, and especially, of course, to list exactly what the historical precedent is that kind of makes these charts a relevant view of what the future is actually going to be like. So, but I'm happy to work with, you know, with the graph, with this document in whatever way makes sense to the editors, you know, so to have a summary, you know, with the graphic, and then have a link to, you know, an appendix or an extended footnote kind of explaining more in depth what they are. You know, I'm happy to do that. I mean, I understand that we definitely have we want to edit, we want to be respectful of the reader's time and kind of give them the key points, you know, in the document body itself, and kind of move the minutiae down. So yes, I'm sorry, it took a long way to answer. Yes, I'm happy to work with you on that. It's a good idea.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns? I think, Daniel, if you scroll back up, I had kind of tossed against the wall there a list of things that might get included in this section. Yeah. And so at this point, I guess I'd wonder, does anybody have any objections to any of these? Does anybody think we ought to throw some out? You know, do we add more? And who's going to do all this?
So, Paul, I just had a question in terms of who's going to do all this. I sort of imagined this section to really be, you know, there are a lot of potential impacts to landfill lifespan, including this bulleted list. I'm not sure that there's that much more detail that we can confidently add to almost all of these bullets, except for perhaps what we talked about and sort of agreed upon earlier, which was the kind of what we've seen happen previously that might give a little bit of weight to these different bullets, like, you know, closure of Riverbend correlates with increases of waste in these 3 years, things like that. I don't know. I don't imagine it to be a ton of work. I'm happy to carry that lift, but I wanted to understand what you're envisioning here and what the rest of the group feels would be appropriate. But certainly, I don't think we have nearly enough factual information to add a ton of detail here, and I strongly recommend sort of bulleting a list of these factors for potential life impacts to landfill. We have Ken's hand. You're muted, Ken.
Of course I am. I think that we need to have some discussion, have some definition about, you know, what is speculative, I guess, seems to be the word that's come up, and then what is not speculative. Because when I'm looking at the scenarios put forth by Republic, for example, you know, saying that the intake of the landfill for the last 4 years is going to apply for the next 20 years. I mean, that's just describing, I mean, when you graph it out, it's a graph that's never been experienced before in the history of the landfill. So, and you know, we have no evidence that, I mean, there's been nothing put forward. So it just seems like things are being a little asymmetrical here. You know, to say that that is somehow a non-speculative scenario. And some of these other scenarios like regulatory action, which, you know, I mean, there's been conversation. I mean, there's legislation which says we are going to impact methane. We're going to do that. So that doesn't seem speculative, you know, to us for a certain point of view. So I agree that, of course, there are things which seem farther out or are less well documented. But I just wonder, like, if we were in the year 2015 having this discussion, whether closure of the Riverbend landfill would have been considered something which was just off in the realm of speculation, something that would never happen. You know, does Republic's estimates about the consumption of Coffin Butte landfill incorporate the fact that Riverbend landfill could close? You know, so anyway, I think we have to have a discussion about that. I'm seeing some conversation, you know, from you, Paul, just saying, well, you know, these things aren't really based in fact. I think we need to talk about that, about what exactly constitutes fact, and what is, you know, and what is indeed speculation. Sorry, a little bit of a rant for me.
Thanks, Ken. So we have Chuck's hand, but we're at noon, and that's our stopping point. Chuck, is there any way you could carry this over for our next discussion, or send me an email? We can include it in the comments.
Yes, that's fine.
All right, thank you. Paul, is it okay if I cut us off here? I just wanted to talk really briefly. I just wanted to get a sense of folks' availability for the coming weeks. I was hoping to schedule like 2 meetings in the coming weeks. And I'm thinking maybe same day, same time. Let me stop the sharing here so we can see each other. I wanted to get a sense of folks' availability though. Let's see.
I will not be available next Monday or Tuesday. I will be at the college football playoff.
All right. So what else might work? We if do we want to meet next week? Would that be a good time to check in on this? Okay, I'm seeing some nods.
I can
So
do
let's-
Tuesday probably. Monday I can't. Tuesday, if I can work around flights, I can do Tuesday.
Okay. Is Tuesday the 10th from 10:30 to noon available for most people? I'm just seeing a show of hands, nods, maybes are okay. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay. I'm seeing a couple maybes. So let's schedule Tuesday, the 10th. And then tentatively, can we put Tuesday the 17th on the calendar as well? That way we just have 2 back-to-back meetings scheduled so we can come back and kind of have a check-in, then we can reevaluate on the 17th. Any availability from 10:30 to noon on the 17th? I'm seeing some maybes, a couple yeses, and a no from Bill. So why don't we, I think we're leaning towards the side of the 17th being possibly okay. Let's check in on the 10th. I'm gonna send out an invite for the 17th. We'll double check on the 10th and reevaluate for the maybes. But either way, let's try to get in the schedule of getting the sort of homework piece. I'll post the notes and the draft from today's conversation online. We have version 4. I'll do kind of an updated version 4 from today's comments. We'll get that online. If everyone can review that, send over any comments, any notes, I'll incorporate it into the sort of major master working document. And then we'll revisit that on the 10th. Does that sound okay? All right, seeing some approving nods. Anything else folks have before we sign off for today? I see Sam's camera's back on. Do you have anything for us, Sam?
I just want to follow up on the last exchange here. I do think you all need to have a discussion about this issue for shorthand, the quote unquote speculative, non-speculative issue. And I'm wondering if there's a way to supercharge that before your next meeting on the 10th. And I'm just brainstorming here. Is there a, maybe Ken starts with a proposal that it should look like this section. It should look like this, but not that. And then the other members of the subcommittee can comment on that and say, well, we think it should be this, that. So we have something to start with on the 10th to dive right into the conversation. Other options, I'm just looking to turbocharge it. So any other good options, happy to hear. But I don't want to lose this, and because we have a lot of additional work seems to depend on this issue. So anyone have any good ideas how to supercharge this?
I don't have a good idea on how to supercharge it, but just really quick, Sam, to Ken's point, I understand possibly him not agreeing with how, Republic Services models moving forward. That is a corporate business decision that's made across all of our landfills. So it's a very similar practice site to site to site. So I don't know what else to present. Our hands are somewhat tied there in how we operate our models. So we can dive into it. I'm just not quite sure what ability we're going to have to come back and, we're talking about trying to come to consensus on a proposal that I'm not sure we're going to reach that. Does that make sense?
No, I understand Republic's position. In a nutshell, just thinking of this from the outside, it seems to me you can agree on a list of factors that are likely to or probably could impact this issue. Then the next step of the analysis is, well, what's the likelihood of X happening when, within what time frame? And then the next level of analysis is, if it does, what is the range of likely impact? I mean, that seems to be, just from an academic perspective, the very rough string of analyses here. I think you can agree on the concept or the construct for that, where I suspect you're not going to be able to get to agreement on is factor 3 has a 12.9% chance of happening in years 6 through 10 in the future. And when it does, the impact will be plus or minus 4.329%. I just don't think you're going to get there. But if we could at least agree on a construct, and then it could well be that the answer is going to have to be something that we don't know with certainty, because of course we don't know with certainty, but the best projection we could make is X. And then people can accept that or reject that based on their agreement with the assumptions inherent therein. But I guess I'm just trying to not solve the problem in the moment, but figure out how do we get to a construct that we can at least agree to and take as far as we can get before we, you're going to have to say, well, I'm sorry, we don't agree on this, we agree on that, and then that has to be captured as it is, and there's no consensus, and that's life. I mean, if there's no consensus, there's no consensus.
We have Chuck's hand.
I think the construct, and I'll just give you one on population. It is a matter of making an assumption like EPA reports in 2018 for every new person born will generate 4.1 tons or 4.41 X amount of waste. And that way it's relative. You've got a construct that supports it by an entity that says this, then for each person born in a county, that will generate X more of waste. And the same way with perils, you have to kind of look at the past to predict the future. If there was a peril with the highway or peril with the railroad that put X amount of waste in last year, I think that we can say this amount was in last year, the probability is there to generate that X amount of waste. So you've got a condition of coming back to a known landmark or like the EPA or past there to predict something future. That's the only way I know really how to get to it credibly.
Thanks, Chuck.
And
Sorry,
the final
go for
thing
it, Sam.
I just want to say about this is I don't believe we have the necessary experts, the time and the resources here to do it under best case scenario, a definitive analysis. I'm recommending you guys consider teeing this up for the SMMP work, and they can and consider it part of the RFP for the SMMP. That if this is your desire, that you say to them, we want people to do their best job at this analysis, because it seems like they have the time, money, and expertise. Well, the county would have to have the money to do this in a more typical fashion, where you spend quite a bit of time and resources and research to dive into this, the various reference points, one of which Chuck just outlined. So that's all I have. Sorry to delay your lunch.
Thanks, Sam. So I guess the ask is for us to think about this going into the next meeting, think about the level of detail that we want to include here, and maybe even the potential tie-in with the SMMP subcommittee work. So if we can kind of include that in our homework to-dos, in addition to looking at the document itself, let's think about how we'd like to see the kind of scenarios moving forward constructed and the level of detail. And seeing some thumbs up. All right. Excellent.
So Daniel,
Yeah.
just one question about, are you going to send us the revised, whatever V5 is going to be here? Are you going to send that to us, or do we have to go look for it on the webpage?
So I'm going to include a link on our next meeting invites. I'll send out the meeting invites for the 10th and the 17th shortly. I'll include a link on the webpage that'll be a link to this revised version. I'll still call it V4 for now. It'll just be like an updated V4. I'll try to do the version numbers with each sequential meeting so we can keep track of it. But yeah, I'll put the latest link in the email here.
And you expect to have that ready by?
Hopefully by the end of the day.
Okay, great. So
5 p.m.
just wondering. All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And Mark, if you can send me over any comments, you can incorporate it into the next
Sure.
draft if you want.
Good, do it. Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks for going over time today.